All right, good morning and welcome to another episode of Talking All Things Cardiopulm. Today we have a very special guest all the way from Wales. We have Ken Chatham, and I just wanted to bring him here, talk about respiratory muscle training. He has over 30 years of knowledge, education, and wisdom to share with us. So welcome, Ken.
Thanks, Rachel. Delighted to be here with you.
So
Anything
excited to,
to help?
yeah, So excited to chat with you again. Every time Ken and I chat, we just sort of go off the rails for 3 hours. So we're going to try to keep it somewhere in a 1 hour-ish time frame if we can. But definitely want you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, let everyone know where you're from, what you do, and we'll kind of get into it.
Okay, Rachel. Well, I worked in North America myself back in the 80s, and that's where I first got a little bit of interest in respiratory muscle training. I actually did a postgraduate course with a lady called Dr. Lind Holland. She's now a physician, but she was a PT prior to that. And she mentioned respiratory muscle training as part of that course. And in fact, it had only been out then for 4 years, from 1976 as original paper, which was Leith and Bradley. And maybe a little bit naively at the time, I wasn't too interested. I thought, well, this is a little bit sketchy. I'm not sure about the science. But I went back to Wales then and took on a new job. And that's really where I started getting interested. Part of that job was as a PT on intensive care, but it was a weaning unit.
Okay.
So taking that on, it seemed logical to me that disuse atrophy may be a thing,
Yeah, for
and it had
sure.
never been looked at. Yeah, but of the respiratory muscles themselves.
Right.
Um, and the people who came to this unit had all been weaning failures. And at that time, there was no way of getting any respiratory muscle training underway in the UK. But eventually, I managed to get hold of some P-Flex trainers at the time, the resisted breathing
Right.
devices.
Yep.
So I used those on people with ET tubes or tracheostomies
Yep.
and actually had really good apparent success. Now, in retrospect, I look back and I wonder if it was just the fact we turned the ventilator off to do
Maybe.
some non-positive pressure breathing.
Right.
Because, if you want to put it sort of very simply, we forget how to breathe if we're constantly having air
Absolutely.
pushed into the lungs.
At that time, were they doing sedation vacations, actually waking them up, or were they completely
No,
sedated
no, no,
throughout?
no, they were awake, but they were
Okay.
just not capable of coming off the ventilator.
Yeah.
So it looked as though we were training them effectively. People who had been on ventilators for 6 months were coming off within a month of training.
Wow.
It was very hit and miss in a way because I wasn't used to this. And
Yeah.
as I say, it was very new at the time. But it got me interested. And in the first 3 years in the new job there, we trained almost 150 patients.
Wow.
And of those, something like 90% came off the ventilator,
Yeah, that seems like
which was
pretty good
fine. So it got
numbers.
me interested. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But then we started to wonder what else could we offer through this respiratory muscle training and how could we objectively measure the impact of that training? So I knew about measuring PI max or MIP, it's the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But that evolved out of esophageal balloon pressures.
Yeah.
So mouth pressures are slightly different. And one of the important things is you've got to introduce a 2 mil leak to avoid buccinator pressure.
Right.
So the very first time we tried to measure MIP in ventilated patients and also in patients with pneumoconiosis or COPD,
Hmm.
at the time we had the ability to put on courses, and it was less structured than it is now in terms of what was allowed in the NHS.
Ability. Yeah.
We raised our own money basically to
Right.
to get equipment that would do the job.
Okay.
So our very first manometer to measure pressure was a magnehelic gauge from a central heating unit.
Hmm.
And we used that plus a U-turn manometer that I actually built myself. Because the only way to test strength is to look at the pressure generation,
Right.
particularly by the inspiratory muscles. We'll
Wow.
come back to expiratory muscle testing as well, I'm sure, to
Yeah.
look at global changes. But I guess the thing that struck me is that the active arm of the ventilatory system is actually inspiration. That's when you're doing the work.
Right.
So if you get weaker, that's where you're going to get problems moving a decent tidal volume. So we got the ability to actually test peak pressures the
Hmm.
MIP or the PE max. And that is tested in the first 1 to 2 seconds of inspiration at residual volume or FRC. Um, but then what struck me more in clinic than on ICU was, are we sure that patients are actually putting in a maximal effort?
Yes, the volitional effort
Um,
is a big piece for sure.
yeah, it is. So we wanted a way of actually looking at that fast rising peak. You're supposed to get the peak very quickly. It needs to be a vertical line in terms of pressure generation.
Right.
The cutoff point for respiratory failure at that time was supposed to be 55 centimeters of water pressure
Okay.
in terms of starting to get failure. And to wean, you needed 20 centimeters of water pressure,
Mhm.
talking about MIP, to
Yeah.
come off the ventilator. So we were able to test that. We attached the manometers that we had at the time to a pen recorder. It was almost before, but not before computers had been invented.
You're
But
close.
it was close, yeah, that's
You're
right.
right at the start there.
Uh,
They were quite
so
cumbersome.
yeah, but it was very interesting because when we tested it, yes, we could look at the integrity of the patient's efforts, but we constantly had to say, right, that's it after 1 second.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, why are we doing that? I know it's about buccal pressure. What happens? Because the patients automatically carry on. And this is where we got the first change in approach. We started to look at, suppose they sustain that pressure for as long as possible. And this is the new measure that we developed at the time called sustained maximum inspiratory pressure. It's not sustained inspiratory pressure, which is a different thing. And this sustained maximum inspiratory pressure is a composite measure. It's to do with flow, it's to do with pressure,
Yeah.
which is equivalent to power output.
Right.
We test that from residual volume, which includes MIP. So we get a MIP measure
Right.
anyway. But then they continue that pressure generation or power output through to TLC. So a full range of contraction.
Right.
So really you're looking at an isokinetic curve as you would if you're measuring quadriceps strength or
Correct.
power output.
And were you doing this in the ICU as well as in clinic?
Yes, yeah, it was more difficult then because we had a laptop eventually and that made it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Are we
Nowadays,
still in the 80s, 90s in this time frame?
yeah, we had a manometer at the time that when we moved on from the magnehelic gauge, which the problem with that was it didn't fix at the peak pressure. It was
Okay.
simply a gauge that went up. And that was used in the literature.
Okay.
Um, but there was a first digital pressure manometer came out in the UK, which was, I think, was called an MPM pressure gauge. And that was developed, I think, by the Brompton Hospital in London. So the MPM gauge allowed us to get a digital readout, but it didn't actually link directly to a computer or to the pen recorder.
Okay.
I could link to the pen recorder, but it wasn't too satisfactory. So round
Did the
about
pen
that,
recorder actually give you a visual or
yes,
just
it did. Yes, yeah, it's
okay?
on paper. So that's where we started to look at the SMIP, this new measurement,
Yeah.
and what did that show us? Because it doesn't, it's not the equivalent of a flow volume loop, for example, because
Right.
it's not just about volume.
Correct.
It's about how you generate a volume change.
Right.
What work can you do? What power output have you got? Which is detailed in the pressure generation you can do.
It gives you a bigger
So
picture of that capacity picture then.
that's right. And I think as I've developed it further over the years, we've moved on to say, what's it telling us?
Mhm.
And really, it's about capacity versus demand.
Right.
And again, around the same time I started looking at training in ICU, I was aware of two measurements that were out there that took the MIP a little bit further. And that's the tension time index that was
Mhm.
developed by Bellomo and Grissino in 1982, and a
Wow.
very similar measure by Millie Kemley, the inspiratory effort quotient, which was used in ICU. Both those looked at capacity versus demand, and originally they used esophageal balloons to look at the
Okay.
pressure generation you were getting. And both those measures had a critical value of 0.15. If you were less than that critical value, you were okay. You wouldn't be going into respiratory failure. But in
So that
fact,
was your cutoff. That was
that
the
was the
hard cutoff.
cutoff
Okay.
in both those equations,
Okay.
which was fine. But the difficulty was you had to accurately measure both MIP and driving pressure per breath.
Okay. Was
And
that done with
that's
the balloons?
With the balloons, you could do it, but very uncomfortable. Obviously, it's quite invasive. But if
Wow.
you were trying to do it in my position on ICU or even on a ward, you really need a body plasmography.
Okay.
And that was going to be a
It wasn't going to
non-starter.
work. Yeah.
So we wanted something else that we could do simply that wouldn't take a long time and wouldn't involve lab tests. Um, and you also really need to know about dynamic compliance if you're looking at ICU particularly. And then you have to accurately also, for those two equations, measure IE ratios.
Right.
So if you don't know how long the inspiratory cycle is, you
Right.
can't actually come up with a decent measure. So there
Correct.
was a lot of guesswork involved.
Yeah.
It took a weaning index a little bit further than MIP alone.
Okay.
And I helped set up a woman who worked to her PhD. Anne Bruton in 2000 did some work comparing the SMIP to MIP as a weaning indicator. And the SMIP
Okay.
was superior to MIP at that time,
Which makes sense.
which makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
But we've now taken it further more recently with the Pro 2, the new device we've now got, in looking at a new equation called the fatigue index test. And I'll talk
Yes.
about that
And
perhaps.
we'll get that one a little bit
We'll
later
get there
because
later, but it's a
yeah.
very similar way of looking at things to look at capacity versus demand.
Absolutely. So the SMIP, essentially differentiating it from MIP, is looking at not only sustained maximal pressure in that first 2 seconds, but then you have the patient continue on as
Yeah,
far as they can. So you get the inspiratory duration
that's right.
while having the biofeedback to actually
Yes.
see the pressure generated
Yeah,
across said time.
yeah. And the biofeedback is to the patient, but also to the operator, so
Correct.
you can look at the quality of the effort that's going in.
Absolutely.
And also, it speaks, I think, to adaptation and background because we
Okay.
get two distinct shapes.
Okay. So
One shape
give
is
me some information on those shapes because we've had a lot of discussion about this.
right. Um, if we look at a sports background, for example, and as I said to you, I used to play a lot of rugby, squash,
Okay.
basically power sports and
Yeah.
cricket. Um, and my body shape, my body build
Mhm.
is more of a mesomorph. I have had friends and people I've worked with. The guy who springs to mind is Tim Mickleborough, who used to work as an exercise physiologist in Cardiff. Is now professor of exercise phys in Indiana, and he's continued to do work in this field as well.
Okay.
Um, Very bright guy, nice guy to work with. But he was a top 50 in the world marathon runner.
Wow. So two
And
different body types, two different sport
yeah,
backgrounds.
the weird thing was his SMIP was almost treble mine, but my MIP was higher than his by about 25–30%.
Wow.
So we had two very distinct SMIP shapes. Mine was triangular,
Okay.
high peak, falling off quickly.
Yep.
Tim's was long, continued for maybe 30 seconds,
Wow.
and fairly flat, but it
Okay.
went straight across. So, in other words, as he moved from RV towards TLC, he was still able to maintain a reasonable volume change. And this is all through a 2 mm resistance, remember.
Right.
Kind of takes care of dynamic compliance. Because
Okay.
although you've got some variable resistance within the lung tissue itself, by fixing that leak at the mouth, we can look at the work done. That can be converted to SI units, which we did with a local university,
Okay.
Glamorgan University, did some work for that for us, and they came up with an orifice flow function. And that converts the area under the SMIP curve to watts and joules. So we've
Got it.
now got absolute SI measures of
Yep.
work capacity.
Correct.
So these two shapes really go across the board. It happens in patients as well. My
Yeah.
very first publication, and my background mainly was clinical, but in addition to ICU, I also worked in cystic fibrosis.
Yep.
CF patients had triangular curves, which is interesting.
Hmm.
The COPD patients, in contrast, had endurance curves.
Which is also interesting.
Yeah, and in terms of COPD, there is evidence in the literature that they've got a preponderance in the diaphragm of
Hmm.
type 1
Correct.
fibers.
Fibers. Uh-huh.
So they keep going at a low work rate.
Right.
And what happens? That reflects life because they tend to have lower tidal volumes, but
Yep.
a higher respiratory rate.
Hmm.
And the reason they do that is that the respiratory controllers are avoiding falling off a bridge
Right.
and overloading the respiratory muscles.
Trying to
So they have that
maintain
like
what they
constantly.
have. Hmm.
Yeah, they work with what they have and they do what they can.
Right.
But either route they take at that point is a route to type 2 respiratory failure because you've got increased dead space ventilation.
Correct. Especially over
Oh,
time as you get closer to severity and disease.
that's right. Yes. So
Yeah.
you're left with a problem unless you can increase capacity or decrease load.
Right.
And what we're hoping, and what we've seen, in fact, is
Yeah.
that our measures tell us something about that, which is an
Yeah.
important new finding. It's not just about observing flow. And remember, a lot of lung function testing, certainly in the UK, is more about expiratory
Right.
efforts.
Yeah.
So we monitor that, we look at obstruction. What we're
Correct.
doing is looking at the capacity of the ventilatory pump to move that air
Right.
and then asking what can we do about it? Because with the measures that we're now offering, it's not just about doing respiratory muscle training. It's about assessing the ability of the body to do that, to
Right.
do the breathing, but also the influence of any treatments that we're offering. Because this can happen with drug therapy, it can happen with
Yeah.
cardiac problems,
Right.
it can happen with diminished O2 delivery. There are a lot of things that can influence changes
Absolutely.
within the individual. So if we can get baseline testing and then in selected individuals, train them with respiratory muscle training that is effective. And again, we'll
Correct.
come on to that, I think, with
Yeah.
the approach.
Absolutely.
Um, we're offering a treatment, but we're offering a unique assessment as well.
Correct. I agree. I think the Pro 2 in it of itself has such unique parameters that can be seen over time. And I think as soon as we start doing this more frequently in clinic, because I mean, sometimes it's wild to me to think, Ken, that you were doing this in the 80s. It's
Yeah.
2025. We always say research is about 10 years behind, you know,
Yes.
practicality,
Yeah.
but we're talking over 20 years at this point, and it's still not a mainstay assessment and or treatment. So one of the reasons I like to talk about these things is because we can easily do this as physical therapists in an outpatient clinic, in the hospital setting, in home health settings to accurately assess and also see change over time, which we've talked a lot about with age and disease progression.
That's right. And I've seen it in myself. I was pretty fit when I was playing regular rugby. My results on the tire on the Pro 2 measurements are down now with aging by about 20% from where they were 10 years ago.
Yep.
But it speaks to sarcopenia,
Yep.
even though there's this constant argument that I think particularly some medics make, but some PTs as well, that why train patients and make them work harder at the breathing? They're
Hmm.
already working as hard as possible and there's self-training.
Right.
My counter argument to that is they are adapting to change circumstances. And that quality of life that goes with that change in activity level is a
Correct.
downward spiral.
100%. I think it's the biggest problem in our elderly population. As they start not feeling well, shorter breath, they start doing less. And as they do less, they do more less.
Yeah,
And
no, that's right. That's right.
I mean, it
And
is very true. But the metaboreflex is actually something that is not also spoken enough about in the world of respiratory muscle training. So if you want
yes,
to
no,
lean into
we
that a little
definitely,
bit.
yeah, we diminish the metabolic reflex. Um, we have seen improvements in peripheral circulation.
Hmm.
We've seen improvements in interleukin levels.
Yep.
We have looked at this with inflammatory disease.
Yep.
We had a very interesting study that Mel McNary was first author on in Swansea, looking at long COVID,
Yep.
and that was something approaching 300 patients
Wow.
um, with very unique SNP shapes.
Yep.
That was written up in the ERJ, I think, in 2022.
Wow.
But fascinating data because that was
Yep.
done at the height of the pandemic.
Yes, it was.
And now I think what Mel wants to do and what is needed is probably to revisit that now that we can do more objective testing that we couldn't do at the time.
Yeah.
Uh, so there may be a role there.
Yeah.
Um, there were a lot of things I wanted to do more of when I was still working clinically. One was to look at wheelchair users. There's a
Hmm.
very obvious need for that, both
Yep.
acute and long term. One of the guys I trained is now into his almost 20th year of using the Pro 2.
Yep.
Um, he's done really well with it. One of the interesting things with him was that he stopped getting pressure areas.
Oh, really? Is this the gentleman that has the spinal cord injury?
Yes, yeah, it's a T4 lesion.
Okay.
So although he's still
Huh.
got diaphragm, he's lost
Yeah.
8 abdominals, he's lost some intercostals.
Yeah.
Um, there may well be other benefits that, perhaps in terms of nutrition, perhaps in terms of fecal mass movement,
Yeah.
but certainly it changed his life. He went from
And
being
he's continued.
housebound to going to raves.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
he's still using it and he's in good shape now.
And 20 years. That's a long time to commit to a device, and it speaks to
It
its
speaks to the
importance.
device
Yeah.
and how hard a work it is.
Yeah.
Just to give you evidence from him, his MIP now, and he's in his 50s now, is 225.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. He blows my MIP out the water with a T4 spinal lesion.
Yeah, yeah. But
Wow. That's
that says
amazing.
something.
That says a
Uh,
lot.
there are videos of him available, I think, still at Pro 2.
Okay.
And you can see the amount of effort that he was putting in.
If
But
it's there, I'll link it on the
yeah.
show notes.
So yeah, he's done really well and he's back training again now.
Wow.
And part of the reason I think is that it's an interesting training in terms of feedback that you get, but
Yeah.
also our default position that we've done in all the studies that we've done to date is to do high intensity training. We train at 80% off capacity, but we
Right.
only do it a maximum of 3 times a week. And in fact, you get maintenance at once to twice a week.
Okay, so before we jump into frequency, let's talk about how this then turned from an assessment tool that you were using in the
Yeah.
ICU to actually a training, because you were using a PFlex in the 80s,
Yeah.
and clearly you were seeing that it had benefit, but maybe we could be doing it better. So how did we get into what's now called the tire protocol?
Okay. Well, we did try threshold training.
Okay.
We managed to get hold of some threshold trainers. And yes, it was an idea, in fact, to fix workload by using a spring valve.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with the original threshold trainer, it had a maximum capacity of 42 centimeters water,
Yep.
which is fairly low.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing as I became a little bit more skilled in this was that you don't get a constant load. The spring is distorted, but as soon as you stop applying pressure, that starts to move back.
Yep.
So actually, you don't get a constant load and you don't get a load through range.
Right.
You get a load up to the point where you're beating that MIP, which you
Right.
remember you can only set to 40 centimeters water pressure.
Correct.
So there are limitations to the threshold device, although the reason for developing it is valid, I think, in that you're trying to fix workload.
Yeah.
You want to ensure with any training that you work to overload. It's got to
Yeah.
be more than everyday capacity. And if you're doing that, you will take a muscle towards fatigue, which is perfectly safe in the respiratory muscles because as soon as you reach fatigue, you fail and you can't
And then
carry
you don't continue.
you don't continue. That's
Yeah.
right. And that was the whole premise. I wanted to have an endurance test, really, is where I came up with the tire originally.
Okay.
There were two tests that were available to us. There was T-lim and there was SIP, sustained inspiratory pressure.
Okay.
That meant doing several runs to see what the maximum inspiratory pressure was you could maintain for a set length of time. The T-lim did the same sort of thing, but it took you to several breaths, say every 10, 20 seconds until you failed. So you got a time element to that one.
Okay.
The other one, you got a pressure element. But
Mm.
both were having to be repeated to get to the accurate point. So it seems to me, and why I called it the test of inspiratory respiratory muscle endurance was that if we set a task failure by decreasing the rest periods between each 80% SMIT breath, so a full range breath,
Yeah.
to the point of failure, you would get a work endurance measurement at the end of it.
Okay.
That should be effective training, and that's what proved to happen with it. The patients liked it, actually. Many of the patients actually bought the original device, which was very expensive. This is going back, remember, to the 80s, and they were £1,500 then.
Okay.
So, but the fact that several CF patients bought it
Yeah.
was telling, I think. Um, but also, Surprisingly, many patients said they cleared more sputum after using the device.
Yeah, you had mentioned that.
And I actually had a paper in the ERJ in 2004 with this.
Okay.
And again, this is speculation, but I think what happens with the tire is that we move the equal pressure point distally. So you're
I agree.
creating an air-liquid interface
hmm
more peripherally in the lungs.
Right.
And if you get air behind where the plugs are, you'll
And
move
we
them.
can actually move it. Yep,
Yeah.
I agree. 100%.
So that's fine. We're not doing any more than that. And it was just
Yeah.
an observation, but it was
Yeah.
reported by patients. But the main reason that they wanted to use it was to stay fitter. And if you've got respiratory problems, what makes sense, it's a bit like due to my rugby, I've got knee problems.
hmm
So I go on a cross trainer, which is low
Right.
impact,
Yeah.
but keeps my quad strength there.
Yeah.
If you've got breathing problems, it makes perfect sense to try and get your respiratory muscles stronger.
Yep.
And one friend of mine who I'm still in contact with, he's now in his mid 50s, who had CF. He says, and he was one of the first people to use the Pro 2. Oh, so it was the RT2 at the time, the predicate device. He started using it when he was in his 20s. And I remember him saying to me, and it sounds kind of trite, but it's true, Ken, actually, I now think I'm going to live to 40 and not 30.
Yeah.
And he's now approaching mid 50s.
Wow.
Um, but it was also interesting with this guy that during that period, his MIP dropped very little. It was still 80 to 90.
Mm.
His SMIP dropped from, I think, 800. These are pressure time units.
Yeah.
They equate to watts. But anyway, um, his SMIP dropped from 800 to 380.
Was there during an exacerbation during that time?
No, no, this was a slow
Just this
progression.
time.
Because,
This was just
yeah,
time. This is a patient with cystic fibrosis, correct?
yeah. And
Got it.
they're generally not CO2 retainers.
Yep.
And when you get this sort of degradation, then you do start to retain
Mhm.
CO2, which is end stage.
Yep.
And is fit measure, this new measurement we're talking about,
Yep.
bearing in mind that mine is it used to be 80, it's now 50,
Okay.
which good numbers. His, by the time he was on the transplant list, had dropped to 10.
Oh, wow.
And what equates to the 0.15 in terms of these measurements is
Yeah.
6.6. So
Okay.
he's getting close to respiratory failure.
Yeah.
And the really interesting thing with him was I was monitoring his training, obviously. That fit number during his training, which mimics life in a way,
hmm
dropped at the start. His fit was 12. At the point of failure, on the fourth level of the tire,
On training.
up to 4,
Oh.
and he couldn't continue.
And that was his stop point.
That was the stop point. And
Okay.
that's when he was in trouble. Unfortunately, he got a double lung transplant now about 12 years ago.
Okay.
And he's doing well.
And does
Uh,
he still train? Because you tend
no,
to.
he did for a while, but he's doing a lot of exercise and he's just
Okay.
enjoying his life,
Yeah, that's fair.
um, which is fair enough.
Yeah,
I,
absolutely.
I, I did give him a device, but in all honesty, he hasn't used it because I think he wants to leave his illness side as far as he can, because
Yeah, yeah,
obviously he's still on all the anti-rejection drugs, etc.,
yeah,
etc. But
yeah.
he's canoeing, he's cycling, and he was a good candidate for a transplant, I think.
But it actually goes to say that the assessment techniques and the training can actually show progression of disease,
Indeed.
progression towards respiratory failure, and then potentially the opposite, right? If you are making gains in such things.
Exactly. Or you hold back the
Yeah,
degradation over time.
yeah.
Um,
Or
and actually,
exacerbation even.
well, in fact, it happened to me. I think I mentioned this to you previously that after my wife died, I developed atrial fibrillation.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize, I mean, fortunately, I was on holiday with one of my doctor friends. And he said, "Are you sure you haven't got AF, Ken?" And I don't think so. But I'd taken my Pro 2 away on holiday with me. This was, I guess, only about 4 months after Wendy died. So it was first holiday.
Okay.
And we went away and I got on the tie. Now, normally I score 30,000, which is the end of the 36 breaths of the
Yeah.
standard time. And
Which is a high number, by the
which is
way.
a high number, yeah, to be fair. It was 14,000,
Oh, so half your normal.
half the normal. My
Wow.
MIP had dropped 10% only,
Okay.
but it was all down to the SMIP. And I was getting breathless on the beach, which I've never done.
Yeah. So for you, that was even a sign that something was wrong outside
It
of
was, yeah.
pulmonary.
Well, in fact, I cut the holiday short at that point because I thought
Okay.
something's happening here. I don't think I had an MI, except it was a very sudden change.
Yeah.
And I put it down to a lot of stress.
Yeah. But
So,
still captured it.
yeah. And actually, from my point of view, who knows? Had I
Yeah.
stayed on holiday or been somewhere I couldn't have got home.
Yeah.
But I immediately went and I ended up having a cardioversion. Um, and I'm on various different drug therapies now, getting enough to be an old man that you accept.
Yeah.
But I'm really delighted, much like with my work on my legs to keep the quad strength going.
Yeah.
I do that 4 to 5 days a week. I
Okay.
try to do the tire 3 times a week,
Yeah.
but life interferes. And I think
It
that's something
does.
we have to take that on board, I think, when we're prescribing any treatment.
I 100% agree. And I think that brings us right into more about the protocol, Ken. So one of my issues with respiratory muscle training as a overall arching idea is that there's a lot of variability in the research. There's variability on device, there's variability on how to perform, how much time to inhale, how much time to exhale. There's also a lot of variability on how many reps. I mean, there's a lot of people that are doing 2 sets of 10 twice a day, 7 days a week. 5 to 7 days a week seems to be the average protocol. Now, with my patients, it's very hard to do anything 5 to 7 days a week. For me, it's hard to do anything 5 to 7 days a week. So, what is the chance that you prescribe this to your patient and it actually gets done? Then do you lose out on the actual training? What I really like about the Pro 2 and the tire protocol is that it really follows skeletal muscle training concepts, including frequency.
Yes, and that's why I designed it that way originally. And certainly Michael, we both know very well from Pro 2, has done a great job with the software, and he was a fit guy in the past as well.
Yep,
So we both come from a sports background, and I would say also that I've trained international sportsmen on this, both triathletes, rugby players, swimmers,
yep,
and they all take it on board if they are good trainers anyway. But
yep,
you're quite right, Rachel. The important what other exercise would you do every day, twice a day for 10 reps? And what benefit would you get? The
yeah,
muscle needs time to adapt to the load. So
yep,
we're looking at overload, take
yep,
it away. Then we're looking at specificity. This
yep,
brings in the putting the pressure on the muscle through
yep,
full volume range.
yep,
Because if you're only training at MIP, at RV, that is not a normal breathing range.
yeah,
You breathe at FRC and beyond to move a
yep,
tidal volume. So if we improve breathing efficiency by offering more strength and more power,
yep,
it will make a difference.
absolutely.
And the patient sees that, not only in terms of looking at the curve on screen, the SMIP,
Yeah,
remember that we load a percentage of that person's individual capability, and
yep,
we do that every time they train.
yep.
So, for instance, I had a couple of extra beers the other day. I trained the following day and I was not
Not
great.
as good.
But it picks up on that. So it's a very sensitive to anything
Yeah.
that's going on.
So I'm going to
Um,
actually pull back on that for a second, Ken, because we hadn't mentioned this piece. So just to kind of recap, with the Pro 2 device, before you do your actual training, you always do a one max rep
yes.
prior to the start of your training.
And that forms the basis of that training on that day. So it doesn't matter in some ways
Yeah,
what your score is.
right.
You're trying to get to the 36 breaths, or you can do bonus breaths, but nobody generally is daft enough to do that.
Yeah,
You get to the 36 breaths if you can. If you can't, you stop, as I
yeah,
did when I
yeah.
had the AF.
And it
Um,
adjusts to you for that day, which I think is so
Indeed.
important, especially
Yeah.
for patients with lung disease. If
Yeah.
it's really hot one day, if it's really
Yeah.
humid one day, if maybe you have something
It's the time
that's
of day.
starting to, the time of day definitely
Yeah.
plays a role, but it
And in
adapts to
fact,
you.
I did a lot of work with Dennis Shale, who was the head of, he was the dean of the Welsh Medical School. Incredibly bright man. Unfortunately, he died, I think, about 9 or 10 years ago.
Hmm.
But in addition to his medical qualifications, he had a master's in chemistry, and he was the sort of guy you could talk to. and
Yeah.
he saw something in this. So
Yeah.
we did a lot of work round about the turn of 2000 looking at body composition with this. And it just brought it to mind then what you were talking about, Rachel, that the SMIP was the most sensitive measure to inflammatory markers.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
yes, it fits. If that's
Yeah.
dropping, and that drops before lung function changes oftentimes as well.
Interesting. Okay. So again,
Yeah,
it's a predictor in some ways.
yeah.
Anecdotally, we can say.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, some of it is it's there and it's written down. It's been published in decent journals,
Yeah.
but it seems meaningful
Yeah.
because it takes on cause and effect. In some ways, you could almost argue with lung function, we're looking at effect.
Yeah.
We're looking at a problem that's occurred and we're picking it up. That's fine.
Yeah.
But if we see both the SMIP in terms of power or pressure generation and the flow that's derived from that, because that's a constant, because we've
Mhm.
actually taken compliance to a certain extent out of it because we're breathing through a 2 millimeter leak. So it's
Right.
a resisted inspiratory vital capacity would be a SMIP, and that's a
Yeah.
constant.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So if you think of it that way, and it doesn't equate to the same shape you would see in a flow volume loop because
Yeah.
that's an arbitrary circle. But again, one of the international rugby players that I trained, he played for Wales and played for the British Lions. He actually improved and this was independent of me, or rather his medical group, knowing that he was training. He
Hmm.
improved his IVC by a litre,
Oh, wow.
and
How long was he training for? Do you
he
know?
trained with me for about 6 months.
Okay.
We didn't have many of those original devices, so we
Yeah.
had to get people in. The other guy I trained, which I did publish as a case study, was a Welsh second row, and they're the big guys in the second row.
Okay.
He was 6'8". He trained for a couple of years with me, but he came in religiously 3 times a week. He had a very bad compound fracture of his elbow running down his ulnar, so he couldn't actually run.
I was just going to get you to that.
Yeah.
So,
So
in our athletes who may be injured and can't do their endurance activity and they're sidelined for a few weeks,
yeah,
would you say that this would be a great way to maintain capacity,
well, it did
game
with him.
shape?
He he actually maintained his shuttle run,
Wow.
although he didn't train other than using the Pro 2 or the RT2 at the time.
So he did no running
He
in
did
that
no running
time.
whatsoever. He couldn't
Right.
because of the fracture site,
Yeah.
but he didn't lose anything on
Wow.
that. The
I
other
think
guy I
that's
trained
huge.
also, yeah, the captain of Wales actually trained with me, and this was on TV. This is all new, and it's just contacts we've got through sports
Yeah.
PTs working with me. He actually had a really bad dislocation of his shoulder. Dangerous game is rugby. Came back from a British Lions tour to South Africa and trained with me. He was back on the field 4 to 5 weeks ahead of time.
Wow.
And interestingly, he was a scrum half, guy called Robert Howley. And he was saying the great thing, Ken, is I could trash talk the other scrum half.
He could still run and talk.
Yeah, and actually, that's something that happens at that level of sport.
Yeah.
The other guy was, excuse me for saying this, but breathing out of his ass. Well, he was able to actually chops at
He
him.
could still.
So, but this happens in that level of sport.
Yeah.
So you can actually improve your baseline even at that level.
Even at an elite level.
Yeah, well, the British Ironman champion also trained with us. His diaphragm got thicker
Oh, wow. Did you actually
on test.
do ultrasound testing?
Yeah, we did ultrasound testing.
Wow.
The thing with the ultrasound testing is to test the thickening ratio as well,
Yeah.
not just the thickness.
Yeah.
Because my friend Tomo, I introduced you to
Yeah.
online,
Yeah.
he's a PT who's doing some great work with people with diaphragm paralysis.
Yeah.
And many of them actually changed the position of the diaphragm. This happened with this triathlete. I thought his diaphragm's looking thinner, but in fact, his resting position had changed. It was lower.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
he knocked, I think, I'm guessing at this, but he knocked about 5 minutes off his swim time,
Wow.
which was his weakest event. So,
Interesting.
and again,
So I'm
uh,
going to bring this back to another big important piece is that this device specifically, no changes to it, no upgrading the device, no increasing the number of resistance to it, can be used in someone as sick as someone who's in the ICU
yeah,
and someone who is an elite ultra marathoner
Yes.
rugby player
Yeah.
or swimmer, cyclist, right? Like all like the list. So
Yeah. And
the
many of those have been
variability,
proved on in controlled studies already.
yeah,
That's the beauty of the Pro 2. It's got 30 years of work behind it.
yeah,
And we haven't run to try and make a fast buck with this.
yeah.
The reverse, if anything.
I was
Um,
gonna say we need to promote this a little bit
yeah.
more. When I came across the Pro 2, I thought, why haven't I heard of this yet?
Yeah.
Because it is such an interesting device, one that it has the ability to actually perform respiratory assessments and then has these added bonus parameters that are still being developed and understood and thankfully are hitting the literature now, which
That's the
actually,
neat thing about it, Rachel, that, it's physiology
yeah,
and physiology is evolving. It never stays static.
that's right.
And it fascinates me,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm no expert at all, but the
Stop
idea that you,
it.
no, it's true. The idea that you can actually take an idea and it expands
Yeah,
means it's probably right.
yeah,
Because we haven't talked about this, but the Pro 2 now has got two patents behind it.
yep,
One is on the fit, but the other thing that we haven't touched on yet,
yeah.
and again, I
Do you
think,
want to touch on the next part?
yeah, if you want to,
Okay, but go ahead.
yeah, I don't mind.
Okay, go.
I think it may be a way of delivering drugs into the respiratory system.
Yeah.
So
And I
that's
think
that's
your
for the future.
information on the mucus movement kind of
That's where I thought of it. Yeah, that
it
kind
kind
of
of
fits, doesn't it?
it fits it because the whole point is that you're getting that air more distally, more peripherally, in its deepest points. And one of the biggest issues using things like inhalers or aerosols is that you lose a lot of it, especially in the mouth.
Well, about 80% is lost. So
Right.
the other thing about using the Pro 2 to do this, I think, would be that you could have bigger particles. It won't be by diffusion. And actually, we can
Interesting.
bypass the upper airway because of the pressures we're generating. And then
Mm,
you open up more peripherally. You can even use, and this is my guesswork, but I would imagine you can use VQ match and, if you like, reverse postural drainage positions
yeah.
to maximize regional ventilation
Yeah.
and deposition by perfusion.
It's actually one thing I haven't tried yet. I've keep saying I'm going to do it the next time is try to use the Pro 2 in different positions and just see how it feels
Yeah,
because that would speak to the postural drainage piece and
yeah,
or the use of medication moving to those areas in a postural drainage position.
yeah. Well, and again, we already do this for VQ match with people with
Yeah.
severe ARDS, for example. You put them
Right.
prone.
Correct.
But the plus of this is that there's no positive pressure, there's no risk of pneumothorax.
Right.
I've been using this approach now for 30 plus years. We've had nobody
No
have
adverse
severe
events.
problems, no
Yeah.
adverse. No. Feels like you're
Wow.
going to, and we do reassure patients when they start, you will get some chest wall stiffness because you're
Yeah.
not used to putting that much pressure there.
Yeah.
But we've had no problems whatsoever, and we've trained cardiac patients. I know my colleague and friend Larry Cahalan has done a lot of work
Yeah.
recently in
Heart
both
failure
cancer
patients.
and heart failure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Magno Formiga is presenting at the ERS. He's one of Larry's ex-students. He's got his doctorate from Miami, and they're looking at not only normative data on the
Yeah.
tire there, but also weaning from ICU
Yeah.
and the use of the Pro 2 to measure in ICU. So
Yeah.
there's a whole spectrum of things here.
Absolutely. I think the sky is the limit with this, honestly.
Well, I hope so. It's come down to a better price bracket, I think, for the general
Yeah.
public.
It's
But
definitely affordable.
speaking as a sportsman, if you've got a problem and you think you can solve it yourself without surgery, you're
Yes.
going to go for it.
Yeah,
And I would imagine
absolutely.
if you can't breathe, I mean,
Yes.
it's scary to me. I had never experienced anything until a couple of
Yeah.
years ago,
Yeah, with the AFib.
and that kind of makes it worse
Yeah,
if you've never
I
experienced
will
it.
say being an asthmatic playing sports my entire life, having to deal with change in temp, change in season affecting
Yeah.
my airways, this would have been game changing for me.
Well, the other thing about this, and I do this, you can use it as a warm up,
Yeah.
and it's a
Oh, we didn't get
genuine
to that
warm up.
yet. Yeah, absolutely. So
You get
besides
your
the fact
second wind
that
before you're on the pitch.
and that was something we talked about this playing basketball. There were always times, especially in certain seasons, that if I went into the game, I needed 2, 3 minutes, come out for a second, go back in. You need that like second peak of second wind, so to speak.
Well,
But if
and
you
you do
could
get
get
that.
it,
It's the same with
but if you
rugby.
could get it with the
Yeah.
warm up,
And, all these things, if you start looking at elite level sports come into play, you get a top player back 4 weeks
Yep.
early. It's
Yep.
bums on seats.
100%. So not only are
Yeah.
we using this for athletes who are injured trying to get back on the court, but maybe as a warm up to essentially give them an edge in competition
Yeah. Take it to the
on
next
day.
level.
100%.
Yeah. And it can be small things. We trained, can't remember his name now offhand, but we trained a guy who was a 50-meter butterfly Olympic champion. And it was quite funny because a lot of the PTs came down to watch. Good looking guy. Um, Mike Foster.
Okay.
I don't
I
know.
don't know
Anyway,
the name.
Olympic champion.
Okay.
But he went with the training. The guys who did best were the medley swimmers, because obviously the breathing becomes a bigger part of that.
Yeah.
But Mark actually went from taking 2 breaths in his competition to one,
Oh my goodness.
which is
Across the
incredible at 50
entire,
meters. Yeah. But that means they can keep their form in the water
yeah,
for longer.
correct.
So there are real benefits
Yep.
specific to sports to be had with this. You can
100%.
think of anything, free divers,
Yeah.
altitude.
Yeah.
There are a lot of options with it.
And I think it's so fascinating to think about that, right? An Olympic swimmer can
Yeah,
get benefit from using this device. And maybe the person who has had their third, fourth bout of heart failure, who is now only ambulating 10, 20 feet in the house, who gets so fatigued,
yeah.
we can start training that person, improve that fatigue capacity,
And
and
it's
improve
not
function.
accepting it. That's the thing. It's not
Yeah.
accepting that debility. It's
Yeah.
doing something generally about. It's not about pacing yourself. It's
Yeah.
about being able to do more before you have to pace yourself. And I
Yeah.
think that's an important difference.
I agree.
And we're an ideal profession, I think, as PTs to actually take this on board.
I do. I
And
believe
I
the
would
same
just
thing.
say have an open mind.
Yeah.
Think about it yourself, and it kind of makes sense.
Absolutely. And I
And
think the research behind this is actually very strong. I've been since I did my residency back in 2013, I was starting to look into respiratory muscle training, and there were two things that always bothered me about protocols well, a couple of things that about the protocols that existed. One, the twice a day training, because who's doing that? Two, there was never any specifics about how long should you actually inhale or exhale. Kind of sky's the limit, depends on the device. And then the last thing was I used a lot of the resistance trainers with the different size orifice to change resistance. And one of the things a lot of the patients would say to me is, we just increase like the resistance on something, and they would say, oh, it feels the same.
well,
And
it would.
I'm sure it does. And my question was, well, what is the effort that you are putting through that device? Because if you pull back on your effort, it's not going to do any difference. So I think
Yeah,
the biggest difference with the Pro 2 is the visual feedback that you're actually sustaining the pressure that you intend to sustain. So
yeah,
you're
and I
actually
think
training to the effect that you maximally could, essentially.
yes, yeah. You're doing. I think there are a couple of things on that. One is that I realized with the original devices with smaller and smaller holes, it depends how much effort you put through that hole.
Yep.
So it's all about creating flow, which requires pressure.
Right.
So just because you're breathing through a smaller hole doesn't mean you're actually working hard enough to get a training response.
Right.
So that's one side of it. The other thing with the Pro 2, and this is an accident, or the tire, it's kind of an accident in the way that I originally designed it, is that because you've got the numbers, probably the first 3 levels you're doing around about 100% of what, or more as you open up, of what you're capable of, because you want the biggest number possible.
Okay.
So you do strength training on the first 2 or 3 levels,
Yep.
and you start to fall off.
Yep.
And then you're hitting more of the endurance training because you start to be weaker and you work weakest part of range.
Yep.
So it gets you both ways. So there's
Yep.
almost a pyramid effect that's coincidental.
Yeah.
The other thing about the work rest ratios, part of it is to make it fairly quick. For me, I don't know yourself, Rachel, it takes me about 25 minutes to do a session.
Takes
It
me a
depends how
little
long you
longer.
inspire for,
Yeah.
basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we don't kick people out for taking a little bit too long to
Yeah.
take a breath. You've got to
The last
get to
set
RV. Yeah, that
kicks
is
my
really
ass
hard,
every
isn't
time.
it?
The 10-second rest break is not enough for me.
If you
But
can't do it, you can't
yeah,
do it. The whole idea is to make it quicker, yes, because
yeah,
you need to do that to
yeah,
actually not only get through it, but to stress the muscle.
Yeah.
But it's not set in stone. In fact, since the original tire, in consultation with Mike, as I say, I talked to Mike about this,
Yeah.
we decided to shorten the original A level, the first level. It used to be a minute between
Okay.
breaths.
Yep.
It's now 40
40
seconds.
seconds. Yep.
But a lot of that was to look at how much time we were taking out of someone's day. And
Agree.
it's hard enough for you and I,
Yep.
um, and it is. I've got to walk the dog. I've got to do some various things. But you imagine being a patient that's got to take all the medications,
Hmm.
got to go to the
Appointments.
GP, etc.,
Yep.
and do functional things.
Yeah.
I cannot for the life of me see how you can do two 15-minute sessions on any device every day.
No way.
And if they're cheap and easy,
Yep.
they'll go in a cupboard. They'll use
Yep.
it for 2 or 3 weeks. If you start this, you need to do it for life, I would say.
Okay, so I want to go back 1 second. Sorry to cut you off, Ken.
Yeah,
So
that's
just
fine.
to be clear about just kind of like default protocol and what we were thinking here is just to, because we kind of been talking about it, but haven't said it specifically. So
Right.
default protocol of the Pro 2 is performing 80% of SMIP
Yeah,
for 6 sets of
yeah.
6 reps with a 90% goal.
Yeah, minimum 90% goal.
Okay, so I just want to
There's
clear, like,
leeway built in,
okay,
so you
so
don't fail by just not quite doing it.
okay, so 80% of SMIP means that we're going to hit 80% of the whole curve.
Yeah.
And then before you fail, or you will fail if you don't hit 90% of that 80%. Did
Yeah,
I say
you've got
that?
to
Did I
fail
say that
all.
right?
Yes, no, that's right. But you've also got to fail MIP and FIT. So we
Okay.
take all the parameters. And the other thing, because you're seeing it on screen, is if you see, let's for instance say your mouth slipped off the
Yeah.
device a little bit,
Yeah.
you can make up missing the MIP point by continuing and doing more at SMIP.
Yep.
So that gives you that drive. Oh, I've slipped. I need to do a little bit more to get the numbers into the green because
To
it's
hold you
color
there.
coded.
Yep.
And that's what I did the other day, and
Yep.
I really didn't want to finish it because I knew I wasn't going to get a great
But
score.
we have a competition going for
We
everyone
have
to
a
know.
competition, yeah, that's clear on it now. Um,
We're just holding each other
it does
accountable
drive you.
here.
It's crazy, but it
Yeah.
drives you.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important issue with it.
So two more parameters that we haven't talked about yet. So we're doing 6 sets of 6 at
Mhm.
80% SMIP, and we have this decreasing rest per set. So 40 seconds, 30 seconds, 20, 15, 10. I think I did that
Yeah,
right. Maybe there's a
yeah,
25 in there. So you have this setup to sort of, how did you say, give it a nod to exercise hyperinflation?
yeah, yeah.
Sort of preparing you, just like you said, we're doing strength on the first 3 sets, moving into endurance. But
Yes,
now with the training, we get two other parameters that we're looking at. We have this total power, which is where you said the
yeah,
30,000 earlier, and we have fit. So
yes,
let's talk about those two. And I think we hit a good amount of this protocol.
yeah. I guess we should talk about the totals first because
Okay.
that was in the original one.
Yeah.
People have talked about the SMIT being an endurance measure.
Mhm.
I think more accurately, it's a measure of work per breath
Yeah,
and power output through the range.
I agree.
Um, the best endurance test, and this is why I came up with the tire on one element anyway, was to have a test of incremental endurance. So it's task failure and the score at task failure.
Yeah.
So an endurance test would be test to failure, whether it's a shuttle run, whatever you're doing. So that end point, I think, is quite important. That certainly when I was in my 40s, I almost hit 40,000 and nearly killed myself trying to get to 40,000 out of
Let's put
39,970.
a disclaimer. Let's not try to push for 40K on this device unless
But
you're Ken.
other people, well, I talked about the guy, the second row for Wales. He got to 63,000.
So
So,
yeah, elite
it's down to
level.
the individual. These are
Yeah.
just numbers.
Yeah. Just
But
to I hang around 20, high 19s.
you've got to say as a woman, though,
Yes,
you
I know
will be
there's
20 to 30% less.
correct. 100%.
But but the interesting thing about that is you've got to do the same work.
Hmm.
And certainly in CF,
But
your
it's
life
adjusted to you.
expectancy is less.
Right.
Well, you can adjust for lung volume with all these
Mm,
measurements,
true. Hmm.
but in real life, you've got to do the same amount of work for the same occlusion in the airway or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So actually, it may be even more important for a woman to get their measurements up
Yeah.
to combat the work
Yeah.
they have to do. Hard life for
True.
a woman,
True.
as usual. No,
Yep.
I'm a
Just add
man,
it
I
to the
understand these things, yeah.
list. Just add it to the
Um,
list, Ken.
so the fit side of it is relatively new. Came up with this as an idea, gosh, it must be 10 years ago now. So compared to everything else, it's new. But I wanted to try and look at a different way of looking at SMIP,
And
to
this
look
is the fatigue index test.
test, yeah.
Yep.
Um, and what I thought was, well, let's take a normal tidal volume,
Hmm.
500 mils,
Okay.
half a litre. Let's see how much power you need to move 500 mils through that 2 millimeter leak in the Pro 2 device. So we know the power per breath with a fixed resistance.
Okay.
Let's then look at the total power and divide that. So that's your IVC, the area under the SMIP, the total power, into that top 500 mils power. So that
Yep.
will give you a fraction,
Yep.
whatever it is. Multiply that then by the time to move 500 mils. Now, thinking back to what I said about a triangular curve
Mhm.
versus a rhomboid,
Yep.
me versus Tim as an endurance player and a rugby player, um, I will move more quickly because I've got a high MIP.
Hmm.
But that falls off very rapidly as I move across the screen.
Yeah.
On the other hand, he can continue breathing, and this fits with his fitness level and
Correct.
being able to run a marathon in 2.5 hours or whatever it is for much, much longer.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing on screen mimics his lifestyle and how elite level he is or
Right.
was.
Yeah.
Um, so we want to take that into account as well. So the fit is measured by looking at the power to exert movement of air for a tidal volume of 500 mils over the total IVC power
Mhm.
multiplied by time of inspiration over total inspiratory duration,
Yep.
all of which are down to the individual. We're not fixing anything. It's
Right.
your maximal efforts that you can do.
Correct.
You will come up with a fraction. What Mike and I decided when I was talking to him about this originally, why don't we then take that fraction and divide it into one? And if you do that, the bigger the
Makes it
number,
work.
the better, which kind
Which
of makes sense
totally.
to get the message across.
Yeah. Is an easier number to use. I can see this being used clinically once
Yeah,
we are like really familiar with fit.
yeah,
And it can maybe be a predictor level. And we had discussed this a little
absolutely.
bit, right? What did we say? Fit less than,
If the fit is between, I would say, 3.3 and 6.6, you're probably going to go into respiratory failure and
okay,
not wean. If it's less than 10, you're struggling.
right.
A normal fit, and again, Magno is presenting some normative data this month actually at the
Yep.
ERS. Larry's also done this, Larry Cahalian.
Yep.
He's got some normative data as well, but I would say for fit and SMIP, you're looking at a SMIP of maybe 4 to 500 pressure time units, going up much, much higher than that for
Yeah.
elite athletes.
Yep.
And for fit, I would say 20 and above are normal. Um, you're not really in any bother,
Right.
15 to 20. So is yours mid 20s? You fit?
Mid-20s is my fit.
Yeah.
I think
So,
I hit
and,
28 last night.
but I would see you getting up above 30, and then suddenly
Yeah.
you're at a level that is the same as me.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
that's
I'm
true.
older,
Yeah. Yeah. And we're
but then
different
you've
body
got the
types.
reserve capacity.
Right. Absolutely.
But it also makes the argument that even though you've had asthma, you haven't actually trained these muscles maximally. And
Correct.
it's still early days for you, Rachel, because I think no, the other thing that
Yeah.
was seriously done with this in all the studies that we did, we had a week's running before we
Yeah.
started taking measures, and all our studies lasted at least 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Many of the studies, and again, talking about the literature out there, not only were they badly designed in terms of the way that the muscles were loaded, they were shorter duration than you would expect to get a morphological change in the muscle. So,
Correct.
you know,
And I
you
think this is
don't,
where you have changed my mind quite a bit because when I did respiratory muscle training prior with devices that have resistance holes, essentially, I would use an IE ratio that was comfortable for that patient. So
Yeah.
2 to 4, 3 to 6, 4 to 8. And I would very much try to maintain that. But you're absolutely right. Why are you stopping at 4?
Yeah.
And if
And I
you were
think
to think
also,
about it at like from a peripheral muscle perspective, you would never train your bicep. I mean, maybe you would in some situations, but you're never gonna chain it. Wow. You're never gonna train it partial way. So why not use full range of the inspiratory breath?
yeah, and even more, if you're thinking about your breathing, you've got the psychophysical side of it as well. If you're imposing something
Yeah.
like that on the patient, it's not the natural thing that they're doing to get stronger
Yeah.
or what they're used to. So you then get higher center recognition of a change in breathing pattern
Right.
that can lead to a sense of increased effort and accentuate the breathlessness that they might be feeling anyway.
It's true.
And I'm sure you've had the same thing, but as a PT on the wards, go and teach that patient to breathe properly. Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but they're breathing that way for a reason.
For
They're struggling.
compensation purpose. Yeah.
And I've said this to people before that I kind of feel that breathlessness is a little bit like pain. It's what you're experiencing as a sense of
Absolutely.
effort.
Absolutely.
Uh,
There's definitely a perception to it.
yeah. So it's not to do with oxygenation. It's to do with how hard you're having to work.
Right.
But if you improve capacity, you will reduce breathlessness, and that's been a common finding in the studies that we've done.
And fatigue.
And
of,
fatigue,
of peripheral
absolutely.
muscles, which I think is such a huge piece for the elderly population who have so many comorbidities who are decreasing effort in functional capacity.
I mean, the other thing, talking about that is you may get a physiological change. Certainly I talked about Tim Mickleborough now, the marathon runner and the exercise physiology prof. His running study that he did when he was in Cardiff, this was recreational runners, but the lactate dropped in that study by 34%,
Interesting.
and that was on treadmill analysis.
Okay.
The heart rate dropped by 30%.
Yeah, I believe that 100%.
Yeah. So there are so many parameters that
Mm.
was it, and that was a very good study. I can't remember. Minute volume dropped. This is over at
I have to go
75%.
back to that one. I don't know if I
Yeah.
read that one.
Look at
Who?
some of it should be on the Pro 2
Yeah.
website. That was
Tell me
quite
tell me the
important.
name of the author again.
Tim Mickleborough.
Okay. I'll look
Uh,
back.
and he's still using respiratory muscle training now. And he has done several papers recently with it. But I was involved a little bit with that study when he was at Uwick in Cardiff, and it was although they were recreational runners, many of them they were all students who were doing sports medicine,
That's right. We did talk about the study at one point. Yep.
and we also looked at swimmers in the same university. So, but the fact he had the online gas analysis, and I think you need more than just an improvement in MIP.
Yeah.
Because you can learn to do them better, which was the whole point originally of getting the pen recorder and looking
Yeah.
at the integrity of effort. So if you get more skilled at the outcome measures
Technique.
that you're looking at,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean a lot in real physiological terms, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So recommendation, I think we started talking about this before, time-wise, to make change, we're
Yeah.
saying somewhere around an eight week time frame,
I would
three
say,
times a week.
yeah. Well, again, it's standard skeletal muscle training theory. Up to 4 weeks, you get in neural adaptation, learned
Right.
response. Thereafter, you start to get morphological change. So I
Right.
think a minimum, I would say, of 6 weeks.
Okay.
But the big caveat with this is that's when studies stop. It doesn't
Yeah,
stop
I agree.
what you need to do.
Right.
So you've got to have something that is doable for the rest of your life,
And
even
then,
if
so
it's
once
only
you
once a
hit,
week.
yeah, so if you're doing 3 times a week, let's say 8 to 12 weeks, we'll go on the long end of the spectrum.
Yeah,
After that 12-week marker, you've made change. Would you
yeah.
recommend continuing 3 times a week, or do you
No, I
think it,
wouldn't because I think it'd be too much out of your life. You've got to live a life. I would say go back to once or twice a week.
okay.
And, we've seen that. You're already
Yeah,
seeing that. If
a
you're doing
hundred
it once a
percent.
week, you're
Yep.
maintaining what you've got.
Yep.
And I think it's these muscles are if they stop working, you're in trouble. So the fact is that you probably get maintenance at a lower dose so long as you go towards fatigue
Yeah.
and keep the muscle strength there. So I think it's enough to get maintenance at once or twice a week. I think training 3 times a week. And I wouldn't advise people to do more than that. Mike and I have got this saying, we see so many studies done with the Pro 2 where people change it. They
Hmm.
change the protocol, and you think, well,
Yep.
fine, do the ordinary protocol first, and
Yeah.
then come back and change things. I mean,
Yeah.
I
I would like to see a comparison. The lower percent MIP, SMIP protocols compared to the 80%
yeah.
protocol and see the significance of change over time.
Well, again, talking about Tim's runner study, the control group in that study trained at 30% of
Okay.
MIP and SMIP. And that's been used as an actual training load in some studies.
Mhm.
Generally speaking, with muscle theory, you should train at more than 40% anyway.
Correct. Right.
But often the control groups in many of the RMT studies has been 10 or 15% or just
Yeah.
placebo totally.
Sham. Yeah,
So,
full
yeah.
sham.
Um, but the only group in the runner studies, I remember it, that got the real changes morphologically and
Or the
in the
higher.
non-dependent variables were the ones at high intensity.
Which makes sense too, because it's following the skeletal muscle theories. Somewhere
Yeah.
around
And
60 to 80% is usually your goal for
which is
hypertrophy
why we used
change.
it originally. So,
Right.
yeah. Plus, you've got to keep increasing or dropping that
Right.
by doing a 1 rep max. And the thing is, you've got to do a 1 rep max to get your target for that day.
Right.
So in a way, it's a fail-safe system that we're
100%.
just lucky enough to
You're
develop.
not training off the time that you did really great 3 weeks ago. You're training off today. And if today is not a good day, that training effect gets changed to what you did, which I think is such a valuable part of the Pro 2. You train
Yeah.
against yourself, you train against your best or your worst, but it's
Yeah.
always to you. It's not just to a resistance style.
And you're still going to get benefit from training at a lower level, i.e., the absolute target at
Yeah,
80% of that day. So
right.
I like the other day, I was saying I was feeling a bit rough, but I thought, no,
Yeah,
get to the end.
yeah.
You're still going to get the benefit in
Do
terms
it
of
anyway.
cardiac function, respiratory function.
Yeah,
And actually, I don't know about you, but I do still get an endorphin release from doing
yeah.
it, or
I really
or
enjoy
relief
it.
at having got it done.
Both. I think there's a psychological piece of I did this,
Yeah.
but I feel different after I perform it, which is always interesting, just kind of given my history with
Do you feel
asthma.
opened up after doing it?
Say it again.
Do you feel opened up as though you've taken a
I do.
bronchodilator?
What I haven't done yet is done a 2 to 3 set warm up because I've told you 3 sets seems to be my sweet spot of best target numbers. I'm actually curious. It's just a time perspective that if I'm gonna go out for a run, do I, do the time for the warm up first? But I want to try it because I bet I will see a difference.
Except you could set up, and I have done this, you
Yeah.
don't need to start at 40 seconds. If you want the warm up, do it
Yeah.
every 10 or 15 seconds.
I
Then your
think,
warm up will take
yeah. I
five
think I'll
minutes.
do 20 if I do that, just because that seems to be my happy break time. 10 starts to push me towards
Yeah.
lesser inspiratory duration. That seems to be
Yeah.
my dip off for
Yeah.
whatever reason. That
Interesting
rest,
to try it though, Rachel, because
I will.
I, again, one of the early studies we did was with elderly people who had a big asthmatic component, some
Hmm.
COPD, but they reduced their inhaler use by 25%.
Wow.
And they preferred doing the respiratory muscle training to the rehab they were doing, the pulmonary rehab,
Yeah.
because it made sense to them. Their problem was breathing.
Yeah.
This made
And
them
I'm
feel
doing
better.
breathing. Yeah.
And there seemed to be a natural bronchodilator effect, which again, coming back to the sputum study,
Yeah.
what we're saying about moving
And the medication
peripherally
potential.
and the medication potentially. I mean, suppose if you've got asthma, it depends where you would want to target the asthma drugs. Theoretically, if we're right about bypassing the upper airway, you could get away with a lower dosage to impact. It's tertiary airway, isn't it? That the smooth muscle ends.
Yeah.
Don't
Yes.
decided anatomy, but
Yeah. I was like,
you
wait,
wouldn't
let me think. I think
necessarily
that's
want
right.
to go to the
Yeah, I'm gonna
periphery.
check it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. You wouldn't want to go specific so deep. Maybe
but
you
you
would have
could
to
get
change
past
the
the upper
effort.
airway. I'm
Right.
saying,
Right.
take less steroids, for example,
Yeah.
for more effect.
Yeah. I wonder if there's going to be a sweet spot on pressure amount or percent of where you're not going to full max capacity because maybe you get too
Oh yeah,
distal.
absolutely. And you may not need to do 80%. What you
Right.
would need
Maybe you would
is
be at
enough
that
pressure
30,
to open
40.
the airway up.
Right.
So for somebody with normal lung function and not and decent pressures, you could probably do the warm up or the drug delivery at 40 or
Yeah.
50% of SMIP
Yeah.
to still get enough pressure to open the airway. But
Yep.
actually, that would enable you then to get a longer inspiration.
That's true.
because you still have power and flow
Right.
to go more peripherally. That all needs work on. And
Interesting. Yeah.
the amazing thing with this,
I hope
because
that gets
really
going. I think that
works,
would be amazing for
well,
so many different
yeah.
populations.
Well, I mean, I know, suppose another pandemic comes along. I've got to be careful here. I don't want to be things.
Hey.
But suppose we get another pandemic.
Yeah. I mean,
We could, I mean, one of the things I was saying to Mel after her studies, crikey, suppose we could test every healthcare worker. Is it the weaker ones that are more prone to get
mm,
cross infections? Can we
maybe.
train them? Can
Yeah.
we identify those at risk?
Would it decrease their overall decline if they were to
Yeah.
become sick?
Or can we train them to change?
Yeah.
You know,
Post.
but if you could do the measurement and then do something about it, even if you couldn't train them to improve, you could give them medication to improve.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter if you've got a meaningful test. And I
Correct.
kind of think one of the beauties of the Pro 2 now, thinking about it, moving on, is the fact that the IMT side of it is not probably going to be the main thing eventually. It's
Yeah.
going to be part of it. It's going to be a
Yeah.
treatment part.
Yeah.
But some of the testing and
I think the
the drug
testing is
delivery would
amazing.
be another treatment part,
Yeah.
obviously. But
hmm
all these things are kind of neat to think about. And it's exciting
100%.
because we can do whatever. There's
And
no
it's
right
a
or
it's
wrong.
a very simple device. It doesn't require multiple change outs of, so for instance, the old assessment tool that I used, the micro RPM, had different mouthpieces for inspiratory versus expiratory for different like I assume it's the filter or the openings. It's probably the leak that they allow. But you have all these devices that you're changing in and out. Then you need another device to perform IMT or EMT.
Yeah.
This device is, can do so many different things and do it well, which I think is phenomenal.
No, I wouldn't have carried on for these 30 years,
I know,
wasting
I know
my
it.
life. Um,
If you didn't believe in it
it's a big
truly.
kick that it,
Yeah,
it it works. That's all I will say. It does
yeah,
work.
it works.
Um,
And we have the research to back it up.
it can't be for everybody because not
Yeah.
everybody's got the personality, the psychology to want to do that.
I think I had a conversation with somebody, I think it was Mike at Pro2. Maybe it was Gary. We were discussing training protocols and like using the device and all these different diagnoses and why, you know, maybe it's not used as much as it should. And part of it, and this is coming from a physical therapist who prescribes exercise and breathing exercises, is that the person still has to do it.
Yeah,
And it's not as easy sometimes as taking a medication to make the change. But if you do perform this type of breathing exercise, you will get significant benefit in your respiratory parameters, in your functional abilities. We've seen it on 6-minute walk test changes. I've seen even balance assessment changes improve. There's a number of different outcome measures that have improved with Pro 2 device, but
yeah.
you have to do it. And and similar to exercise is if you stop, you will start to lose some of those benefits. It still does hang around for some time. As you said, you didn't train
Yeah.
for some time and you still maintained quite a bit. But the
I
one
think that's,
downside of the training is that you have to do the training. And it's not a downside for me, but I do think that speaks to what you just
I
said.
think for some people it will be. I mean, I remember getting a referral for somebody who was on a ventilator, one of the weaning patients, and this guy was £400. Oh, try your training device. And unfortunately, that's the sort of referral that we would get. And I
Hmm.
thought, well, this guy hasn't exercised in his
Yeah.
life. And, it's just inappropriate. So you've got to select your patients. And it's got to be taken as a real scientific approach. It's
Mhm.
not just something just to try. It's
Right.
very easy to prescribe PT.
Yeah.
This is what this is about. This is genuine exercise
Yep.
training theory. And some
Yep.
of the best people I've worked with this has been all the exercise physiologists, to be honest, because
Yeah.
they're the real experts. And I'm saying
Yeah.
that as a PT myself.
In the physiology piece for 100%. Really
So yeah,
understanding the training benefits and the physiology behind it.
well, it kind of proves it, doesn't it, Rachel? If you look at the results we've had, because we've stuck
Yeah.
to the rules, if you like, the
Yep.
tenets of skeletal muscle training,
100%.
then it works.
Yeah,
So
I
yes,
agree.
it's something that I'm very happy that it's getting out there thanks to Pro 2 now, and I hope I hope we see it take off.
Yeah,
And if we've any sense as a profession, it should be us doing it.
I
That, that,
100%
that's
agree.
that's one hope that I've got.
Sing it to the rooftops, Ken. I 1000% agree. We are definitely the profession that should have a big hold on this
Well, I think so. Otherwise,
or
we don't
push
just,
for it.
yeah, yeah. And actually, it's a lot of fun to do. And when you see
100%.
you're making a scientific based
Yeah,
treatment difference, that is one of the most satisfying things. You could literally change people's lives with this. I'm not
100%.
trying to be dramatic with that, but
No,
we do see it
yeah,
from elite sports down to the most ill patients.
correct.
I can't remember. I wanted actually many years ago, and I couldn't guess. There's almost protection around some of these. But I wanted to get Christopher Reeve on this before
Oh
he
wow.
died, but
Yeah,
I couldn't get past the people that
yeah.
were.
The
I
barriers,
understand that.
a lot of red
It's,
tape, I'm sure.
yeah.
Can't just
Um,
call them up on the phone.
well, that's the problem with some of these people, isn't it? If
Yeah,
they've got problems, then yeah,
yeah,
it's hard. But hopefully we'll get there because singers,
yeah.
musicians, woodwind.
This
When you stop and think about it, there's so many
Yeah,
options
there's
for
so
them.
many options between athlete, singers, mucus
Yeah,
production, medication delivery, general aging.
yeah.
I think people who are just aging should be using this device as a
Looking at
means of
me.
exercise.
You're looking at me. Yeah.
I, I didn't look at you. We're on Zoom, Ken.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have
you were thinking it,
to,
but yeah, I know. But sad but
but,
true.
but you're 100% correct. All right, Ken, do you have anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think
I
we've
think
covered most
I
of it,
think
Rich.
we
It's been
hit I
fun.
think I think we did real good. And thank you so much for giving us your knowledge, your time. You are a wealth of information, 30 years of research. It has been a pleasure chatting with you.
No, thanks very much, Rachel, and yourself, and I hope it works out now.
Thank you. Me too. I want to put one more plug in. We are going, Pro 2 will be at the Academy of Cardiovascular and Pulmonary Physical Therapy Fall Conference, September 12th to 14th. We will have a table on the 13th, the Saturday. I will be with Mike at the Pro 2 table, and hopefully we'll be able to do some SMIP assessments, trial some training. And if you're there, we'll have a 20% off discount, and you could purchase the device right in-house. And that'll save you on some shipping too. So thank you so much, Ken. Everyone else, thank you for being here. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and whatever you have to do, get after it.